Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started. We're talking about orchestrating your entire software delivery lifecycle with CircleCI and JFrog. So first, we need to understand what we mean with the software delivery lifecycle. Everyone knows that lifecycle. It's move fast and break things, and it's a continuous loop, right? I'm sure everyone's seen this quote. It's been popularized across Silicon Valley and the tech industry as a whole. Maybe you've even written books about it. I'm sure many of you have heard and uttered these words. But we don't really want to break things. The idea behind this mantra is that we build up enough discipline and maturity in our software delivery process that we can move fast without breaking things. But we don't want to move so quickly that we disregard concerns around security, compliance, attestation, and everything else that's really important. So it's really about moving fast and also track all the things to ensure timely, consistent, and repeatable delivery of value. And also, let's really try not to break things. What are we actually going to talk about today? I'm Eddie Webb from CircleCI, and joining me is Craig Peters from JFrog. Through our webinar today, we're going to cover 4 areas: easy adoption of your software delivery pipelines, reducing the amount of friction in those pipelines, and really what I'm talking about is making change easy, allowing teams to iterate and evolve over time. But you want to make sure you're tracking everything, and then can converge on best practices over time. So let's get started with a simple example of a CircleCI configuration. This is a basic hello world. So if you were to check in this configuration file to a repository linked with CircleCI, it would start up a slightly outdated Ruby container and print out a first hello to the console. This is a great example because it's concise. It's really easy to understand what's happening because of its simplicity. But it's not super valuable. It's not actually doing a lot towards our end goal of delivering great software. So let's make this example a little more interesting. Craig, could you tell us how a tool like Artifactory would add value to our delivery pipeline?
Sure, thanks, Eddie. So you talked very quickly about how you would want to make things sort of attested and tracked. So when you connect a tool like CircleCI that's really designed to automate things in a very repeatable way, you typically will connect that to a version control system, right? So often it's GitHub or some other system that allows you to track your source code and in a very robust way. It's all about versioning that code. The developer interacts with that source code and works to make sure it goes there. You brought up the example of Ruby. So in Ruby, you write code that often depends on something like a gem. Well, those gems come from somewhere, right? Somebody else writes gems. This is the way in Ruby you make code reusable. And that's just fine when you're sharing gems between people who trust each other. You put those gems in a shared place. And if that place is available, then when you build your Ruby code and package it up for running in whatever environment you're running it in, it's always available and you're good to go. However, what we've learned over time is that not all Ruby code is trustable. Not all Ruby code is always available. Now this, we've just picked on Ruby. Well, this is exactly also true for Java. This is true for Go. This is true for PHP. This is true for Python. In every language, we write our code and we depend, all of us software engineers are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We're depending on open source software, commercial software, all kinds of things. And when we build those dependencies into our software, we represent those dependencies in the source code control system. That's great. Those references help us understand what those dependencies are. Now, when we go to resolve those dependencies, we don't always want to go to the public internet to do that. We all know that the public internet may or may not have exactly the reliability, the attestation that we need. This is where JFrog Artifactory comes in. Artifactory is a universal repository manager. It manages all of these different package types, 25 plus different types. It strictly versions them in the same way your source code is versioned. We version all of your packages. We provide the dependency management to resolve external dependencies. And we put in place the storage management, access control, auditing, automated security and encryption that you need. In addition, when you connect Artifactory with a tool like JFrog X-Ray, which scans for vulnerabilities and licenses, it then enables you to implement policies so that as an organization, as you're trying to move fast and not break things, you can know that you're also not introducing licenses that you shouldn't have in your software. You're also not introducing known vulnerabilities that you don't want to have in your software. And you can tune those policies according to the deployment target. And on the deployment front, Artifactory connects to Bintray and also another product JFrog provides called distribution that actually push those binaries to the endpoints. They make them available to any cloud, any mobile phone, any endpoint where you actually want to consume them. So JFrog provides a platform to enable the robust management of all kinds of packages to make your software more liquid. So when tied together with a tool like CircleCI, you can automate the end-to-end development process in a safe and reliable way. And I'm really happy to be here so that we can see Eddie, who's now going to show us exactly how that works using a very new feature of CircleCI.
Awesome, thanks, Greg. So I think anyone who's been involved in an audit or software delivery can immediately understand how this would add value to our software delivery lifecycle. So let's see how easy it is to configure. Oof, that's quite a bit of configuration. Let's walk through this. Starting with line 6, we're going to check out your source control. That's a pretty basic step for anything you're doing in a software delivery pipeline. By line 8, we're going to install the JFrog CLI, and this is what's going to let us communicate with the registry. We configure that down on line 13, and when I say configure, what we're really doing is pointing out a specific registry and providing it credentials. Then by step 16, or line 16, we're running Docker build. This is a basic Docker build against the local folder, and we're giving it a specific tag that we want to be available within Artifactory. Then moving down to line 19, here we're actually going to log into the Docker registry that's within Artifactory and promote our image up to the JFrog Artifactory repository. And then lines 25 through 33 are really important. These lines collect all the additional metadata about our environment. So things like information about the Git, what was the commit hash, who was the author, who are the users involved in this particular contribution, important environment details. Any variables in the environment can have a huge impact on build tools and test tools. So we want to make sure that we're capturing all that important metadata about the point in time and the state of the environment of our build so that we're confident that we have this deterministic picture going forward. This is a much more valuable example of a software delivery pipeline than a simple hello world. Unfortunately, it's not very simple, it's not very concise, and frankly, it's not super easy. I can definitely understand how someone new to CircleCI would be overwhelmed by that configuration, and it would take a bit of time to digest it all. And that's why I'm really excited to announce CircleCI platform plugins. And I'm actually just kidding. This is not something we do. And my product and marketing teams want to make sure I make it very clear it's not something we're doing. And there's a reason for that. It's a philosophical standpoint that we have at CircleCI. When you depend on binaries or configuration or frameworks outside of your configuration, something like plugins, it can actually introduce risk and undermine that deterministic nature of our software delivery pipeline. So again, not doing plugins. But I just want to show a simple example of why that's so important. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of configuration as code. This idea that's been popularized in modern software stacks. With some level of configuration, you define that entire stack and you version it over time. This makes it really easy to discover it, to share it, and to adjust and iterate over time. And most of all, it's completely deterministic and repeatable. And so this silly image is actually an example that I've suffered in my previous life managing DevOps platforms for a large organization. You have to maintain a fleet of builders out there with lots of different versions of Java because you've got that legacy application that's still hanging around in Java 6, and you've got the bleeding edge teams that want to be on Java 9, 10, and higher. So you have individual servers with specific capabilities, but now you run kind of a bit of roulette, where when you check in your local code and configuration, it's going to land on any one of these build environments, and you might get different behavior resulting on the build server you run on. And things like Java version mismatches and Maven version mismatches can be actually incredibly hard to troubleshoot because the errors are not at all intuitive. So as someone operating or maintaining this fleet of build servers, you have to add a lot of additional complexity and logic to make sure that certain builds only go to certain environments and maintain different capacity of those, subsections of your fleet. And it's an operational nightmare. So we don't like this model. But what if we could use explicit values from the repository itself? Your code lives in the repository, your tests live in the repository. Why not put your configuration in the repository as well? And this is exactly what CircleCI does today. The benefit here is there's no surprises. There's no server upgrades or maintenance that you go home on Friday, your build's working, you come in Monday morning, all of a sudden your build's broken. Dev team is scratching their heads. What happened? Oh, we upgraded the servers over the weekend. And this lets everyone evolve at their own pace. And it's also really easy to share best practices. I can give you this configuration file for my Java app, and you can start with the same skeleton, and you're off and running with your Java app. But unfortunately, even though we can be explicit and avoid being surprised, it's so verbose. So even though we have this really great deterministic nature by eliminating all those dependencies on the external environment, it's a little bit daunting to maintain configuration like this. And by the way, I say this is so verbose, it's 33 lines of config. If you want to see really verbose configuration, check out some long cloud formation templates, 700-800 lines easily. But we don't like it anyway. So what if we could take that same idea of dependency management that you use in software that Craig spoke to earlier, and actually allowed us to do that same versioning and dependency management with our configuration? Well, now we'd be able to control the versions and features, elect when we use them. We would never be surprised because we're in control of those explicit versions. And it's going to keep our configuration nice and concise. That idea of standing on the shoulders of giants that Craig mentioned. And this is something real that CircleCI has now. We just launched last week CircleCI Orbs, and it is package management for your configuration. This is just a screenshot of our landing page. If you go to circleci.com/orbs, you can find information on consuming and creating orbs. And we'll of course include this link in the slide deck as well. So let's see what CircleCI Orbs could do for this great Artifactory integration. We can shrink this 30-some lines of configuration down to just about 10 if you skip the blank line here. And let's take a minute to walk through what this configuration file is doing. Starting on line 1, we're actually versioning the configuration schema itself. And this is really important. We're talking to CircleCI with a specific version and time, and that's 2.1. The next 2 lines declare the orbs that we're going to be consuming. These are our dependencies that we want to ingest in our configuration file. In this case, I can be very explicit about the version of Artifactory I want. It's patch version 3. And then I go on to define my workflows. In this case, I've got a simple build publish job. We're going to do a Docker publish using the Artifactory orb. And there's only 3 pieces of information I need to make that successful. I need to specify the registry. So this is my Artifactory URL. In this case, I'm using JFrog SaaS solution. I also need to know the repository within that registry we're going to talk to. And then what Docker tag should I use in my Docker build steps? So based on these 10 lines of here, we're going to get the exact same output from the 30 lines we looked at previously. And let's see an example of this in action. So in this demo, we're going to publish a private Docker image up to our JFrog repository. We're going to use local dependencies. I've got a little shell script in my code repository that I'm going to bake into this Docker image. And we're creating that with a simple Docker build against the local directory. So this is just to show, if you look up top, all that's in my repository is a Docker file, a README, my bash script, and then of course my CircleCI configuration, which we saw on the last slide. I'm going to go ahead and commit this up to GitHub. As soon as GitHub detects the push, it's going to send a webhook over to CircleCI, and CircleCI is going to trigger that build to run immediately. So here you can see our build running in CircleCI. It's going to spin up a dedicated virtual machine for my job because I'm using some Docker commands. We're then going to install the JFrog CLI and configure it to talk to our private registry. And then it's going to move into our Docker build steps. The Docker build steps are using a really simple Docker file here. I pull an image down from Artifactory, I move my demo script up to it, and then symlink it to treat it as a system binary. You can see here with my job completed, I should have a Docker image in my JFrog repository. And the Orb's actually going to print out this handy URL upon completion that we can take a look at the build information. So looking at this, I can see there's my Docker image and all the various layers underneath it all being tracked by Artifactory. So that was a pretty good example of just packaging up a Docker image and pushing it out to the JFrog registry. And we saw that Artifactory was aware of our image and all the layers and tracking that information for us. Let's evolve this example a little bit more. Rather than using my local demo script, I want to pull something in externally. So in line 13, I've extended the Artifactory orb by providing my dependency steps. And so these steps will run before my Docker build and allow me to pull in any additional dependencies I want to be available for the Docker build. In this case, I'm simply downloading that demo bash script from an artifact repository. And we'll see how Artifactory is now going to be aware of that and can show us the relationship between the two. And then on line 17, I'm adding a consume job. And this is really just to demonstrate that the shell script that I'm pulling in from the registry is in fact present in my environment. And so a little bit of interesting CircleCI foo here, we're actually going to use the image created in the first job as the build container for the second job. So you can see that the tags on line 12 and 24 match. Just to show there's nothing up my sleeves, no trickery here. This is the public GitHub repo. Anyone can go out and view. There's a few branches for the different demos in this webinar, but the point of this one, there's no demo bash script in the repository. It's just my Docker file and the CI configuration. So in this demo, we're going to consume those dependencies, the shell script from Artifactory. Again, we're going to publish that custom Docker image up to our private JFrog repository. And then in the subsequent job, we're going to pull that Docker image down from the private repository and use it as our CircleCI build environment. Rather than watching the screen paint in this next demo, I'm just going to walk through a previous build I completed earlier in the week. Here I've got my Docker job. Just as before, it's going to spin up the environment, install and configure our CLI. But then before running Docker build, you can see our new dependency steps are running here. Again, in this case, it's a simple command to download my demo bash script from the Artifactory registry. I then move on to my Docker build, publish it up to registry. And as before, we get this neat little link here where I can go and get more details about the build environment. But we can also take a look at our Docker push command, because anytime you run a Docker push, it's going to generate a digest of all the layers in your image and give you a unique hash. And I'm going to save this unique hash on my clipboard and show you how we can use that in just a minute. If I go back to my workflow view, we created a Docker image in this first job here, and we want to consume it in the second one. Anytime you use a Docker image in CircleCI, we're going to print out to you the image name that's being used, but we're also going to print out the specific hash it resolved to. So if I just do a search on this page, you can see that the hash for my previous job that generated the image does in fact match the hash that we're seeing for this build environment run. So if that holds true, and I did in fact download a demo script from the repository as well, you can see the current working directory is empty, but yet when I call demo, I successfully execute my script. This hash has additional value to us as well. In this example, it's easy. I know the previous job created it, not too exciting. But what if I'm using this image in a different project or somewhere else, and I'm being audited, and now all of a sudden I need to understand where the heck did this image come from? Well, there's a great feature in Artifactory where you can actually search based on the checksum, and we have a checksum. So let's drop that in and run a search, and you can see a single result gets returned, and it is in fact our Docker image. And we can jump over to this Docker image and see it in the local repository. There's the same image we created, build image latest. And again, I can see on this page that the hash does in fact match the checksum I expected. But there's another interesting piece of data exposed here. I can see for this build image, any builds it's associated with. So under my produced by tab, I can see that this Docker image was in fact created by our Artifactory demo build number 39. And this right here is the same link that was exposed at the end of the previous job. But now rather than having just my Docker image, I also have an additional module within my build, and that's the Artifactory demo module. That has a single dependency, and that dependency is that demo bash script. So you can see here now Artifactory is tying all these pieces for us together, and we have the full traceability in any direction. I can take a look at this demo bash script in the repository itself. And looking at this, the bash script itself also exposes this builds tab. And now this bash script wasn't produced by any jobs that we ran. I manually uploaded it for the demo. But I can see that it was consumed by jobs that have run through our pipeline. Specifically, it was consumed by our demo build 39. And the last thing I'll show you with this build is not only we're attaching the metadata from all the artifacts and the relationship to each other, but as I mentioned, we're collecting that important environment details. So here's all the variables, 79 of them, that were present in the environment at the time we ran this build. And so this could be important information that we need to recreate the build or get understanding at a future point in time. Great. So with CircleCI and JFrog, it is the ultimate software pipeline because we showed how you can get that full traceability of your software, your dependencies, and all the environment variables and metadata you need to have that deterministic view of your software. Orbs are also extendable. And so, although I don't have a specific demo for it, and this is one that everyone loves, the Slack Orb was created by Kyle here at CircleCI. It's already the most popular orb just a week after launch. And it's really popular because it's so easy. So here I'm gonna augment my Artifactory deployment job with a little message notification at the end. And it just says, hey team, someone published this new version of the Docker tag, and here's where you can go and get the information. So you can see how these orbs start to build up a really powerful scenario where you can orchestrate higher level concerns. The previous two examples, I actually thought that last one was pretty cool. We did a full life cycle of publishing and consuming, got full traceability of all our dependencies, really great information, but it was doing a simple Docker build. What if you have a more complex use case? You're using something like Docker Compose. Potentially you have multiple Docker images, or they're just in subdirectories that you need to reference. Or perhaps you're using a third-party tool like Jib. Jib is a project from Google, and it allows you to containerize your Java applications. I personally really like Jib and use it a lot because I write a lot of Java-based applications, and it just makes it easy to containerize them without being concerned about the container itself. So rather than running a simple Docker build, I've overruled, I don't know, the Docker build steps provided by the Artifactory Orb. So here you can see line 15, I'm gonna specify my own Docker steps. And lines 20 to 21 show the specific Maven commands using Jib to actually generate my Java image. It then exports it to a local Docker context. So now line 21, I can point Docker build at that context instead of a Docker file. And because I'm using Maven, and anyone that's used Maven knows that it likes to download the internet anytime you do anything, I'm adding some caching. So before I run my Maven commands, I'm going to restore cache based on my POM file. And then after I run my Maven commands, I'm going to update that cache with the latest. So my first build is still going to take a hit, but all my subsequent builds should be much faster. So let's take a look. Oh, actually, sorry, on this page, I've added two more jobs as well. Line 27 shows an approval job. And this is a little bit more CircleCI foo. We have an explicit type of job just called type approval. And all that does is, like it sounds, it holds up the workflow for some manual intervention. It could be user acceptance testing, it could be manual exploration, or maybe you just need sign off from some other party. And then line 32 just adds a simple hello world job. And that's really just there as a placeholder to show it won't run until that approval is accepted. So for this demo, we're going to use that non-standard tooling, Google Jib, to create our Docker image based on that Java application. Because it's a Java application, we're also going to pull these dependencies using Maven through Artifactory proxy of Maven Central. And this is important because, again, you're going to allow Artifactory to paint that picture of our entire ecosystem and how all the dependencies interrelate to each other. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and publish that Docker image up along with all that important dependency information to JFrog's Artifactory. So as soon as I committed that code from my repository, you can see CircleCI has detected it. It's running our build with Google Jib. There's the 3 distinct jobs we talked about, our Docker publish job with Google Jib, our approval job, and then again, that mock deployment placeholder job. So we can dive into our Google Jib job. That's hard to say. Same thing here. We're going to spin up the environment, install the CLI, configure it. Now we're going to run those Maven commands though, and then run our Docker build. You can see one reason I like Jib so much. It took 4 seconds there to run my Docker build on the Java container, really fast. And the end result, again, I could expose that build information from the environment. But let's check out the workflow. You'll see now my workflow is on hold. So it hasn't run the deployment. It's waiting for someone to come in here and say, approve this job. CircleCI has an audit service running in the background. So we're going to detect, hey, it was Eddie that approved his job. So that's forever recorded in the books of history. And then we'll run our mock deployment. Again, nothing interesting in this job. It's just to show that it waited for that approval job to run. Let's see, this is all about tracking all the things in our software delivery lifecycle, right? So now we've added this Java app with a bunch of Maven dependencies. Let's take a look at that. Here you can see is the builds page for the job that we just ran. And now again, there's 2 modules. There's my Docker image itself, this time named Spring Boot, and I can see it tied to the build. And I can expand that and see the various layers within that Docker image. But I can also see now this other module, and this module is actually my Java application, my demo app patch version 1 snapshot. I can see that's got 39 dependencies. And anyone who's used Maven or Java will recognize this format. These are the Maven coordinates for all of our dependencies. As I mentioned, all of these in turn are being pulled through our Maven Central proxy. So I can come and visit these in a repository and see, here's my Jackson annotations jar. Because it's coming from Maven Central, it's not something we produced. So it's not going to be associated with any jobs from that aspect. But it is being consumed by projects within our ecosystem. So on the Used By tab, we'll see that this annotations jar is actually being consumed by 2 projects, the demo Spring Boot Jib app build 38 that we just saw, as well as some other sample projects I have. Just as before, there's a full bidirectional relationship between all these pieces. I can see from my build, the assets used. I can see from the assets, the build they were related to. And as before, I've collected all this great environment information about the point in time this job ran, just to make sure we have that full picture of the environment and everything that was going on at the time. These variables, you can see again, 79 of them, almost 4 pages. It's things like the user, the commit hash, any versioning of tools we have in the environment. The only thing that you won't find here are secrets, because Artifactory is smart enough to know that you probably don't want to publish secrets into your build repository. So those will be eliminated from this collection, but everything else you'll see here. And so hopefully with that, you get a good picture of how CircleCI and JFrog really are the ultimate software pipeline. We've done a few examples today, a simple Docker push using a Docker file, a more complex scenario in which we both push and consume Docker images from our repository. And lastly, using some non-standard or custom tooling, in this case, Google Jib, but it could be anything, Docker Compose, etc. And through the flexibility of CircleCI Orbs, you can mix and match these commands to orchestrate your higher level pipeline. So Artifactory is a great tool for that metadata management repository solution. You can add additional source code scanning, browser testing, and all the things that you need to have that comprehensive build, test, and deliver lifecycle. Really appreciate everyone making the time to join us today. I hope that you got something out of this webinar. We've been queuing up any questions that have come through the presentation, and Craig and I will do our best to speak to them. Samantha, I don't know, have we had any questions come in yet?
Hi there, thanks Eddie, thanks Craig. You know, I don't see any that you guys didn't address during the conversation that you guys both had. So if anybody does have any, please use the Q&A tab down at the bottom of the Zoom window.
Yeah, we'd love to answer them. Nice job, Eddie.
And I'll just make a note while we're waiting for any questions that might come in. This webinar is being recorded. We'll make it available online in a few days, along with answers to any questions we have, as well as these additional resources you can find.
So Eddie, I think that is, talk a little bit about how each project that wants to use Orbs, does it need to enable it in the settings? So it sounds like this is kind of a how do you get it set up and how do you use it easily?
Yeah, that's a great question. So now that we've officially launched our Orbs product, it is enabled by default for all CircleCI projects, but it includes by default only our certified Orbs. And so those are the Orbs created by CircleCI so that we can provide you with a level of trust and confidence. Because this is a broader ecosystem though, with lots of partners and developers contributing to it, you can elect in individual projects to trust what we call uncertified Orbs, which are just Orbs created by third-party developers out there in the ecosystem.
Okay, great. There was a question about somebody who, it sounds like they're fairly new to CircleCI. They just wanted to see, is there a way that you can give them a quick overview of their pipeline setup?
So it's actually, you can see on the screen here that CircleCI public Artifactory demo repository has all the examples I walked through today. Or if you go to circleci.com/docs, you can find tons of great getting started examples for all the popular languages and frameworks, as well as different workflows examples, common patterns of doing parallel jobs, fanning out, fanning in, sequential jobs, etc. So there's tons of great resources out there.
Okay, thanks. And another question in terms of, I know that JFrog has a free trial to Artifactory that enables someone to kind of get started by just using the full version of Artifactory through the trial. Can you explain a little bit how CircleCI provides kind of a trial or kind of a quick start for those who are new to your CI tool? It looks like maybe Eddie has mysteriously dropped off. So I'm not sure if Kim from Circle, if you can address the question about trial, if that's available for Circle, for new people to CircleCI?
Yeah, so anyone can sign up for one free container at any time if you go to our website. And then if you find that you are interested in exploring more, if you email sales@circleci.com, then they can set you up for a more comprehensive trial.
Great, thank you. One additional question came in that looks like if either JFrog or CircleCI are going to be at KubeCon, and if so, would it be possible to come by and see a demo?
Hey, that's a great question, Samantha. I know certainly I will be there, and I look forward to talking to anybody about this integration and others. Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, we will as well. Please stop by. Also, reInvent. I believe we'll both be there.
Correct. JFrog doesn't have a booth, but I, among other frogs, will be there at reInvent as well.
Great, sounds good. Thanks for that confirmation. And I don't see any additional questions that you guys haven't had the chance to answer. I don't know, Craig or Kim, if you wanted to have any last thoughts.
I just wanted to emphasize that I hope what you saw is that CircleCI does a great job of automating things. The Orbs simplify the configuration and management of those configurations in a versioned way that complements perfectly the repository management and package management provided by the JFrog platform. And we hope this is getting you going, and we look forward to any future questions and interactions you have. Thank you.